This is an interview for Peep-magazine. We're joined with Dr. Noel McLaughlin, popular music historian and lecturer in the Department of Arts at Northumbria University, co-author of Rock and Popular Music in Ireland Before and After U2, classed as definitive. His latest book, How Belfast Got The Blues, is available now. I will put the links in the description and I'll flash it up on screen. You can get that at Google Books, Amazon and Waterstones, I believe. And if you don't know where else to get it, you can contact Peep-magazine or contact Noel directly. He who controls the space controls the universe. Let's get into it. Okay, no, thanks so much for coming down. It's really great to see you. I haven't seen you for a few years, but for the people who don't know, me and Noel go way back. Noel was actually my lecturer a few years ago at Northumbria University, and I kind of class you as a mentor as well, Noel. But I know you're going to cringe and hate this, but yeah. How I started this interview, Noel, is I said, he who controls the space controls the universe. And there's going to be themes throughout this because you're a big fan of Brian Eno. Mm-hmm. And I'm quite a big fan of his as well, so I've done a bit of research on him. I already knew bits and bobs, but I'm interested in your perspective on Brian Eno as we get into it, you know. You grew up in Ireland, mm-hmm. Self-proclaimed. You said that you were trying to make music and you didn't want to be mm-hmm. famous. You didn't want to be this person in the limelight. And I'm just quite interested to hear. Let's get into it. Let's hear where it all began back in Ulster.
Well, first off, thank you very, very much. I'm very flattered and humbled by your introduction. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to work doing something that you like and working amongst creative people, and you just hope in some way, some small way, you've been of some value to them. When you go back to those years, I was 14, 15. I grew up in a small village called Portballintrae, yeah. About 500 inhabitants. Very, very beautiful in the seaside summertime. Totally dead, like Siberia in the winter. And this all relates to finding your place. I mean, like, music was the thing that offered some magic. So down the road, 4 miles down the road from us, was the town of Portrush. Portrush is kind of Northern Ireland's Blackpool stroke Brighton, except an awful lot smaller. Mm-hmm. But it had exotic things like a Big Dipper and a cyclone and all of that. And a main street full of small venues and ramshackle hotels. And I would misspend my youth. Friends of mine owned a hotel, and it had a disused bakery up the back, and we'd form bands and play things. And I saved up and got a synthesizer. And this connects with your wonderful guest Mick Clark, because Mick was one of the musicians who was involved in that era that I loved, that seemed in those days very far away and possibly exotic. Yeah, and that was the sort of the world of, you know, Joy Division and the early Human League and Cabaret Voltaire and Soft Cell and
Japan
and all that British post-punk electronic. Funny, I was listening to Japan's Tin Drum last night. I hadn't listened to it in years. I got the remastered vinyl of it, and it just doesn't sound like anybody else before mm-hmm. or since. Mm-hmm. So I kind of then was pretty crap at playing live. Wasn't really that excited by playing live, so I became really interested in recording. Yeah. And I'm of that generation, you know, where having a tape recorder. I don't know. Maybe you're a generation maybe a bit young for this, but being able to record things and play them back was really exotic. I remember as a kid having one of the wee piano key sort of like tape recorders in a wee case, and I'd just go around recording things. And then when Porta Studios, as they were called, came online, basic 4-track cassette recorder, I thought, oh, great. So I became really interested in sort of studio stuff. And it was just something to do. It was a way of kind of finding yourself. And I became this sort of teenager that, was kind of ridiculously thin, long sort of bleached blonde hair, bit of eyeliner, bit of makeup, probably looked like a dog's dinner. But it was a way of standing out, making your own world in Northern Irish society of that time. Now, I wasn't in the world, the deep, dark world of the Troubles. It seemed, we knew it was there. Sectarianism was in the air. But you were far enough away from it up at the coast, And it was just a way of creating an alternate reality. And so I thought of myself more as a non-musician, following Brian Eno. I mean, I had a few piano lessons when I was a kid, but hated piano lessons. And then a friend of mine, he was really into to recording too, so we just both would kind of make this little homespun studio, a couple of synths, bass guitar, drum machine or two, and then we'd build that up as the years went on, and that was the big deal for us. It was something to do, and you'd sort of write imaginary soundtracks, and then when I got to university and got into do media studies, and it was a practical course like the one you did, and the most exciting bit for me was soundtracking the films that we made. So myself and my friend, we'd have get a portable TV in the studio, and then we'd start trying to sync all this stuff up. And that was probably the finest stuff we did. Didn't have any vocals. It was I just loved doing things like programming and making odd sounds and a bit per man's BBC Radiophonic Workshop.
Of course. It was just quite interesting that you wrote, because I was reading on your blog, and it's interesting that you said sounds of the interest and no interest in playing live, but it was like ambient sounds of the Himalayan foothills and footsteps. I just loved that. I just loved reading that, and like a deserted, windswept island off the Greek, like a Greek island or something. And I kind of not empathise, but I can relate to that, because when you're in, like, say for instance, I'm not saying you were, but you read about all these kids growing up in council estates, and they always imagine they're somewhere else, and they want to play exotic music, and they're getting so influenced by, big stars around the world, and I can totally relate to that, and it's really interesting. It is. It
was my friend actually, Don Ramage, who made all these particular tracks with. I mean, there were cassettes and cassettes and cassettes of them. I've got very little of that stuff left. In fact, it was an ex-girlfriend of mine who sadly has passed away, Marley Slutkenhusen. I gave her, she wanted some tracks, and I burnt them onto a CD, and then I realised I'd never ever kept them for myself. And Marley and I didn't work out, but we remained friends over the years. And then I didn't know she was ill with cancer. And she would come to London and come to Newcastle to visit me. I didn't know she was ill, but I knew now with hindsight that she was visiting people close to her within this borrowed time thing. And the last time I met her, she put a disc in my hand and said, maybe you might like this back.
Wow.
And if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have any of the sort of recordings. I mean, I can be as vain as the next person, Cliff, but I've never sort of really held on to things too long. There's a moment where you kind of have to let go. And I suppose I thought, like, who's really going to want to hear this stuff? I was very flattered that, when I lived in London, some folk were around at the house I was living in at the time, and the landlord, my friend, he put a track on that Don had done called Boat People, and there was a guy in the room that was a David Sylvian fan, and he thought it was a missing David Sylvian track in my kind of land. So we were obviously trying too hard to sound like people we liked. But I guess when computers came along, something of the magic went out of it for me. The computer became the centre of the way that you worked, and I loved old kind of analog synthesizers because all the knobs were, and you'd play in real time and make these bizarre sounds. And I remember when it was the Steinberg Pro 24, whatever it was called, came along, and a friend of mine, he had one of these, and he went through the learning curve. And I remember just not wanting to go there.
Right.
And then we got an offer of being signed by a controversial couple called, I wonder if I should name them, or this could be controversy. They would feature heavily in the story of Shaun Ryder after he'd left the Happy Mondays, shall we say. And this was before then. And I remember them telling me that they were getting involved in managing Shaun Ryder, and I thought, oh, that's brave. And they said, right, okay, we'll do a deal and we'll get you in the studio. And I remember they mentioned Don Letts, of all people, being the producer. And I remember even thinking at the time, how did Don Letts fit with these kind of odd tracks we make? And then my friend just said, these people scare the life out of me. We wouldn't last 2 seconds in a studio. We do this for kind of other reasons. So if you want to go ahead and sign the paper, no, I'm sorry, but you're on your own.
Right.
And then I went, do you know what? He's absolutely right. And then somewhere you kind of... that's your place for then, and then you have to find out, well, what am I actually gonna do? What can I turn this stuff into? And I began to dabble a little bit with making video, and quite fancied the idea of being creative in that area. So I was lucky I got into a practical media studies course, and the one at Ulster was one of the few in the country at the time in the university sector. And I just tried my hand at that, but I realised I wasn't good enough to be a director. A director is a very particular kind of skill. I wasn't bad at assembling images in the way that I assembled sounds, but I discovered something else that I was a bit stronger at, and had a greater enthusiasm for the ideas involved. And then that set me on the course to being the person who's sitting here in front of you.
All right.
For good or for ill.
So you studied for your PhD at University of Ulster. And then were you the kind of first, was that course, that PhD, the first of its kind in Ulster?
No, I think I had this, once I graduated, I went and travelled around India for a bit. I'd saved up enough money. Travelled around India for about 4 months, and went out there very fit and came back 3 stone lighter. Got dysentery and absolutely everything. Still wouldn't change it for the world. It was a utterly remarkable experience. And then I came back to a kind of rather grey Northern Ireland and thought, what am I going to do with myself? And
right.
I had I managed hotel bars and did stuff like that, and then I thought, right, this is going nowhere. But I should say this to everybody listening, because in case they're younger. It was the days before minimum wage. So I was managing a hotel bar for the pricely sum. As a graduate, they paid me a bit extra. So I was managing a hotel bar for the pricely sum of £2 an hour.
Wow.
And maybe time and a half for overtime. And that's 1992. Not really that long ago.
All right.
And you think £2 an hour compared to what the minimum wage is now relative to inflation. So I thought, I'm in dead endsville. Because it's odd class-wise. I'm sort of brought up very much in a working class environment. No silver spoons or anything like that. But because it was Port Ballantrae, this little seaside town, it didn't. We weren't living in a housing estate, But the housing stock was different. You had a kind of detached house and a bit of ground around it, but it was by no means a nice kind of middle class bungalow or anything like that. And so I thought, what am I going to do? I was the first in my family to get a university, and I thought, right, PhD perhaps. And someone had suggested, Noel, why don't you write a social history of Irish rock and pop for your PhD? It hasn't been done. And I thought, yeah, that sounds great.
Oh, yeah.
This sounds good.
That's where I'm getting it from.
So I went into that, but what I found that I was over ambitious. I wasn't ready, or experienced enough to write something as grand as a social history of Irish rock and pop. It was more like a cultural study of aspects of Irish rock and pop. It was a less ambitious thing. But it wasn't a natural even at starting that. It took me a long time to... I think I procrastinated writing. And I could so easily not finished it. And eventually you find your groove, and I kind of found my groove a little bit late, but I still did it.
Still,
got my PhD, and on the very day I handed it in, the next day I was starting at Northumbria University.
Oh wow, that quick.
Yeah, so I was here in the autumn of 1997.
Right.
And PhD was handed in the day before.
Wow.
The day before.
So there's kind of no hanging about there then. You're straight in, yeah. That's excellent. So you moved.
Well, it's not like how you would plan. I mean, as I think my life would read like a manual on how not to do your career.
Right. Which sometimes isn't that bad, because like we talked before off camera, it's like, you can plan, procrastinate for years and years and years. And it's like I say at the start of these interviews, let's get into it. Just get into it. Just like next saying, just do it. But it's like you can kind of mess up with all the thinking and the pondering and the I should have done this and I should have done that, and analysis paralysis.
Analysis paralysis. Yeah.
And it's like I'm really scared of that myself, so I can kind of see where you're going there, and it's absolutely great that you come straight. Yeah. So you come to Newcastle, teaching at Northumbria University, and it was media production, but cultural studies with media production.
Yeah, it was. I think I was employed to teach a mixture of sort of film studies and cultural studies to mainly practice students. And in those days, as I think of the legacy of the Polytechnic, they wanted the kind of critical studies part of it to be delivered in-house and not by existing more academic film studies, that you'd somehow sort of bridge the gap. And it was a challenge learning to do that quite quickly, because I remember getting off the plane and I didn't know anywhere else to go. I didn't even have accommodation sorted out. I'd had to trust that the university had set that up for me, and they said they would, and they did. But I remember being met by the program leader and taking me for a coffee, and he said, "Right, we're having a bit of a coffee and relax here." He says, "Don't want to alarm you, but you have a first year class that you'll be lecturing in 2 hours' time."
Oh no!
And I went, okay. Would you mind telling me what you screened for them? Oh, it was one of the videos in the list of stuff that you suggested. And I went, okay. Which one? I had to go and get his diary out, and then went, John Ford's The Searchers.
Oh, yeah.
And I went, right, okay. I think I saw that film about 10 years before for the last time, and luckily I'd been lectured on it by a very eloquent and gifted academic, and I had to sort of go away for an hour and sit down. It was the days before I could just go and Google aspects of The Searchers. There was no, you couldn't even go to a Wikipedia page in those days, and there were no smartphones. So I had to kind of go in and talk off the top of my head for 2 hours.
Oh, wow.
And I was a person who was very used to having to prep up and write things out longhand. I mean, I wasn't, again, a natural at going in and speaking. Mm-hmm. That would kind of come later. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's actually quite good to be thrown into things. It's the old adage about if you want to teach a child or a dog to swim, you just chuck it in, and in a way it kills any procrastination. Mm-hmm. And well, I mean, the good news in the story is I survived. I didn't dry up after 10 minutes, and the students seemed kind of over the time appreciative of me, and that was very, very important. Mm-hmm. But you're off in that journey thinking, I mean, I didn't know how long I was going to last at in this city I'd only been to once before for the interview. And I really liked what I saw of the place. It really intrigued me when I came. But I thought maybe I'll last a couple of years, and who knows what life brings. And then nearly 25 years
Still
later, 25 years later, I'm still here, but I'm more of a film studies lecturer now than and that course that you did that I taught on is now called film and television production rather than just media production. But I mean, I'm talking too long, Cliff, please stop me.
No, of course not.
But the mad thing was that if you think about it, okay, I've just finished a PhD, and three things I think were really important in the air. I didn't want to leave Northern Ireland. And the first was that there'd been a paramilitary ceasefire, and there was the prospect of peace. And the Good Friday Agreement hadn't been signed, but it was coming down the conveyor belt. I thought, typical. I've lived all my life with Northern Ireland and the Troubles, which we never thought we'd see the end of, and then I'm having to move just as Northern Ireland's at peace. And the second thing, of course, was that it's New Labour coming to power, and what that would mean positively for life in Northern Ireland. And then the third thing was I was, alongside my PhD, I started to DJ, and I was running a very novel club night in the University of Ulster. It was called Shabash.
Shabash, yeah.
And I mean, God, we were no David Holmes, myself and my fellow DJ, in terms of our mixing talents, but we kind of taught ourselves. But we were playing stuff that, even a lot of our contemporaries at that time, like David Holmes, would acknowledge no one else was really doing. So we were playing a lot of British-Asian crossover stuff, like Asian Dub Foundation, and a lot of stuff from Nation Records and Black Star Liner and people like that.
And a lot of dub stuff as well.
A lot of dub, and then breakbeat was pretty new at the time with Skint Records and Wall of Sound Records, and this stuff just blew the cobwebs away. It sounded so fresh, and it wasn't as hard as full on rave. You didn't kind of need to be E'd up for it to sound amazing, because I always remember a lot of my friends were very heavily involved in rave and making music, and then they started getting into new jazz and that sort of stuff and broken beat. And I said, what prompted the move into all of this? A great mate of ours, Mike Bandoni, who recorded for 9 Bar Records, and he was connected to the whole Ninja Tune thing and all that. And he just said, well, it was just once you stop taking the E's, the music sounded really, really bad. So the musicality then begins to kind of creep in. And I love dirty old hammer and rave. I mean, but like music, it's all about time and place, isn't it? It's all about context and circumstances and all of that. And so we got into this stuff, and we never thought it was going to really get an audience. We were just thought we were playing this because we like it.
Yeah.
The management of the Students' Union let us run with it, and then it became quite successful. And all that was going on. And I thought, right, the next plan was to maybe take it to Belfast and take it to the capital, see if it works there. And I never got the chance to even test that out. Then I've got the job here, and then I left DJing behind for years and years because I was just learning the job.
Right.
Sorry, Cliff.
It's good. It's
talking way too much.
It's absolutely fine. It's great. That's why we're here. You've kind of jogged a memory about tapes, because that's kind of the tail end of tapes, but I still had tapes, and like a lot of people my age and a lot of my friends have still got tapes, and you've jogged a memory talking about tapes, because we used to organise like a party in the house, like after school and the weekend, and it was someone's birthday or it was New Year's Eve. And at school I used to I wouldn't say I was an events organiser, Mr. Popular at school, but I used to organise these little house parties, and then my friends would come and then would get other people to come, and then we'd get half the class to come. And anyway, long story short, I was late for the party that I kind of organised, and obviously I had tapes on us and to play when you get there. And I knocked at the door and I was like, must have the wrong house. It was like, it seems like there's nobody in. It's like knocking on the door. And then my friend come to the door and he was like, get in. Like, we're waiting for you for the tapes. And like, so I came. And I remember what I had. It was, what the hell was it? It was, it wasn't like a Deep Heat, but it was something of that ilk, you know. And I remember the tunes I put on first was Adamski. So I put that on, and then the party just kind of like erupted with these like tapes, you know. But you've kind of just jolted a memory at the back of my mind there.
I mean, I kind of missed the compilation.
Yeah.
Tape, just because you had to really think about what you were going to put on it, and you had to do it in real time.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't the right sequence, you just had to go back and start again. And
yeah. Stop that, rewind it. Yeah.
Yeah, there isn't the same romance with a Spotify playlist, or it's it's great. I mean, having so much music available.
Have you said at your hand, isn't
I mean,
it?
I'm of that era where music was scarce. You know, you had to really think about what you were going to buy. I mean, my thing was that I'd save my dinner money up. I wouldn't use my dinner money at school to buy dinner.
Yeah.
I'd go and buy records.
Buy music.
And then when you only had X amount of money, you're very choosy then about what you bought. And then all of a sudden you're beginning to realise when you get a wee bit older that what you're buying's kind of starting to say something about your tastes to other people. But records always had that kind of magic. I was always looking for something that I could play again and again and not get tired of.
Yeah, of course.
And that you discover more and more things in it. And it's different now. I think you've got all music sort of kind of there. So you've got Apple Music or Spotify or whatever the platform. I mean, yeah, you make playlists, but it changes your relationship to music in ways we could talk about for hours. And I know there's no rewinding of the clock, and we can't go back to that more innocent time. But maybe it's why I like records, because you put the record player on, and then it's not going to get interrupted by messages pinging in if you're playing music off your iPad.
Yeah.
And it just, to me, sounds better. And it's a very simple experience. Take the record out, give it maybe a bit of a wipe, stick it on. And sounds wonderful. And
were you? Did you come to Newcastle when Hitsville was here, the record store?
No, I don't remember Hitsville.
You don't remember it? Yeah.
No.
It must have closed when you came. I just thought I would ask, because that was quite a big record store in the centre of Newcastle.
I remember RPM when it was in Percy Street, and
that's actually still RPM.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't buy anything like as many records off them as I used to, but that was the first record shop I ventured into when I moved here. But I wasn't. I mean, I brought my turntables and stuff over with me, but they were just they just sat in the place I lived, and they didn't really have a working life.
Yeah.
I mean, DJing would come back into the story kind of a bit later on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It would bounce back in. So you're teaching at Northumbria University, and that's, for the people who don't know, that's when me and Noel met. And I always remember, I actually forgot to bring a couple of things down just to show in the background, which one of the films was Diva. And you lectured on that French New Wave films like White Telephone.
Oh, that was more the precursors, the form of Italian cinema prior to Italian neorealism.
Right.
No, I mean Diva. I'm trying to remember the context within which. I mean, I bought the soundtrack to that album recently because it's so good. But it was odd. I mean, at first I would try to thematize the modules that. And then after a while you realise that's not what a production student needs. They just need to see a diverse range of different films that the marketplace might not afford them the chance to see so easily.
Yeah.
And then also maybe look at films that one does know, but then see what kind of critical approaches to them can pull out. But I mean, even if you've got 72 screenings and 72 lectures across 3 years, I think that's what it was.
Yeah.
It's something that you should have shown. with hindsight, is always going to get left out. It's something my colleagues now in film studies still talk about. They go, I mean, God, imagine our students have got through 3 years of film and TV studies, but we've never shown them X, you know, and I don't know how you get round that.
You can't show them all, can you? It's like...
No.
Why I brought that film up is because it's always stuck with me. Me and the twins were sitting in the lecture. Obviously, we sat there, we watched the film. You do your intro and all the history of the film, and I kind of didn't know what was going on with the film halfway through. Then I think towards the middle, I was starting to get it, and then. But anyway, towards the end of the film, the lights came on. And I don't know if you were just, I don't know what was going through your head that day, but you kind of stormed up in front of the screen, and you went, if anyone in this class doesn't appreciate the cinematography in that film, get out this class right now.
Did I put it so bluntly as well, Cliff?
Yeah.
Oh no.
But it was absolute brilliant.
No.
It was like we're all just stuck to a chair, I think it was really early on in the course as well. And I was just thinking, shit.
I mean, it's lucky. I mean, I'm nostalgic for those days because you guys had a dedicated screening room.
Yeah.
And we just took that for granted. And it had a blacked out ceiling, and it was basically a black box.
That was brilliant.
And it had a very good quality projection system.
Yeah.
And now, you know, the rooms in Northumbria are all standardised. So you have a standard digital projector, and some of the rooms have a Blu-ray player. But I've never seen stuff projected as well in a higher educational setting as that room. I think I remember another year I sat in and we had a very good SD version of, or HD equivalent version of Paris, Texas. And I remember sitting in with the students, and it just looked absolutely magnificent on widescreen. But I mean, that's what we're there to do. I mean, I just love great cinematography.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, it was so great to hear, Noel. You know, it was really.
I feel embarrassed.
I think some of the other guys who, I wouldn't say we didn't get on with as much, but there was a couple of people. You're not going to get on with everyone on your course in your class, you know. I think the realization hit with some of them, and they're just kind of starting to sink in the seat and thinking, I think I may be on the wrong course. And I think it was a benchmark. I think you hit a benchmark there because me and the twins, Gab and Luca, if you're watching, we after class we were just like, yeah, this is going to be so cool, this course. But I think that the flip side of that is people dropped out. But not because of what you said. I think maybe it was just not for them. And, you know, I've thought about a lot of things that you said on that course. Obviously, I'll not go into them all now, but I remember you gave us a bit of advice on when I was making my short film. You went, Cliff, don't have anyone on the set who doesn't do anything. Always have someone who does something, and I still have that now. Because what you get is people just hanging around, just watching you, who maybe don't know what they're doing. And then when they see you pondering and looking about and like, how am I going to frame this? How am I going to do this? They start giving you bits of advice and just think, you know what it is? I wish you hadn't came, you know? And I kind of took that advice on board, you know?
That advice actually came from Ken Loach.
Oh, wow.
Because... Well, it didn't come directly initially from Ken Loach to me, but it came from Emer McCourt, who played Susan in, I think, a film I screened back in those days, Riff Raff. On the building site. And she played the kind of the junkie girlfriend with aspirations to becoming a star. Yeah. But she visited Northumbria, and I think Emer now lives in Newcastle, but it was before she'd moved to Newcastle. And she came in and she very kindly did some work with the students. And this would be 1998, maybe 1999. And she went out to set to watch some students filming. And the students had this kind of quite intimate scene to film between nothing sexual. It was just a girl and boy talking in bed. And she just clocked all the folk hanging around. And said, look, here's an experiment for you. Get everybody out of the room that's not required to be there,
Yeah.
and then try and do the scene again. And then we watched it in action. And the difference for, the young amateur actors, but the difference also for the director then beginning to get a feel for what was actually going on. Because the hardest thing, I think, when you're making a shoot on a low budget is that you don't have the luxury of hierarchy. You can't order folk around. You can't turn up on the set fresh and just think about creative ideas. You're lugging in a generator, you're lugging in lights like everybody else is, and that's how it should be. But then how do you create the same intimacy where you're focusing on the thing itself? And that was it was those sort of little aspects of engaging with things that I'm glad you remember aspects of things like that, because critical ideas play their role in making things.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And I think the really good students got that. Not only got it, they went on and made a career out of it and are still working in that area. I'm really, really pleased about that. And often some of the folk that came into the course as wild cards, they didn't have the orthodox qualifications, didn't have the points that were required, but had different kinds of experience. And sometimes those wild card folk went on to become some of the most conventionally successful students on the programme.
Yeah. I remember so much from the course. It just, it was a brilliant course. Hands up in the class who wants to be a director. Everyone puts their hands up, except me and the twins who didn't.
Yep.
And a couple more, but I'd say 90% of that class. But you knew that everyone was going to put their hand up. Who wants to be a director? And it's like, it's kind of not what the course was about, But to tail off on that, I once arrived to one of your lectures early, which I used to do quite a lot. I think I was just so keen to learn, and so keen to learn what these guys are here to teach you, And you went, Cliff, you're about half hour early. Go home and listen to your latest Ultravox album or something. That's always stuck in my head. That's like, Ultravox. Like,
why did
walking away.
I think that was my vain attempt at kind of trying to be surreal.
Yeah.
Oh,
brilliant. And a big shout out to Mike Gallen as well.
Of course, absolutely.
Obviously retired. And Robert Jefferson, who's, I think he's actually going to come on, Rob.
Oh, God, I hope he does. I hope he does.
He's kind of agreed to come on, so it's going to be absolutely great chatting to Rob,
he's a wonderful filmmaker, and another great individual at inspiring. He's great at inspiring students, and I love the way that towards the sort of the end of media production, as then was before it became film and TV production, the animation wing of it was basically sort of an experimental film strand. It was any diversity of means that wasn't just straightforward live action filmmaking. So it wasn't just restricted to animation. And that began to produce really, really interesting work that kind of fed into all sorts of things in all sorts of directions. And that was Robert and the late Peter Leake that really allowed it to go.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, the only folk that are left in film and TV production from our era, as it were, are it's really Robert and another individual, Ian Cottage. And everyone else is retired or...
I actually forgot to mention Brian Hoey.
Who was also retired.
Yeah.
Also retired. And, it's a different kind, I think, it's a different kind of higher education now. When I moved to London, I had a friend who had spent a year at New York University's film school, the alma mater of folk like Martin Scorsese and all that stuff. And he said to me, so you taught media production at Newcastle and Northumbria. I said, yeah. Well, what was the biggest complaint that the students would have about a production course in the university sector in the UK? I said, well, that one's fees, etc., weren't going into master classes and practical how-tos and, guest cinematographers and guest lighting camera operators and all of that, guest editors. And he paused and said, yeah, that was what all the students at NYU would moan about.
Wow.
And if you think of the economies of scale, I think the fees then were for NYU were $30,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
This is before, Lord knows what it would be now. That wasn't even buying enough to satisfy the students' expectations.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you do it in higher education? It's very difficult because I think some students expect that they're coming onto a film school.
Yeah.
And film schools are elitist organisations, and, driven by private patronage and all of that. It's a lot to expect and to try and meet those expectations of what you can do in a course. And the strongest bit of it's really the critical ideas aspect of it. I think if you can ignite students' imaginations, that's more important than the how-to stuff. In fact, one of the brilliant things that Peter Leake devised, because he was there from the founding of the course in '86, and he noticed that he's just to try to keep up with all the technology.
Yeah.
And he couldn't keep up with it.
Yeah.
And then he discovered that the students were just intuitively starting to learn it more quickly. So he developed the course would work in a way where it would have an informal apprenticeship system built into it.
Mm-hmm.
So folk were always passing on what they learned about, say, avids were relatively new in those days. And then the real value you can give the students is not trying to show them the nuts and bolts of avid, it's when you cut.
Yeah.
And it's what good editing is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the teaching should come in, not the how-to stuff. Because you'll learn that stuff more quickly in the industry if you go to work in the industry anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's all about how you design something and how that works.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You worked with, I'm going to pronounce his name wrong, Kimo Perkio. The genius that is Kimo Perkio, yeah. And he actually was a student at Northumbria, and he graduated. I mean, I don't know the guy, but he graduated in animation, so Robert Jeffson should know who he is as well.
Yeah, though Robert wasn't teaching in the course at that point in
was
time.
he not?
No, but Kimo was, again, one of those folk who worked in animation, but it wasn't traditional animation. It was very much an amalgamation of stop motion work, most famously like Schwankmayer's work, and gifted with stop motion. But he also would go in and learn sort of new programs. And he became a whiz with this thing called elastic reality. And it was sort of like an early morphing software. But he wouldn't use it just to morph. He'd use the morphing as a way of... he'd use it in a kind of musical way. To either for edit transitions or to kind of work alongside a soundtrack drone or something. So say this doesn't sound too technical, like if you see you're opening the envelope up of a synthesizer sound, he would get the elastic reality to match the waveform.
Right.
And he had these kind of skills. And he came from a sort of music background, music production background first. But he was exactly the same age as me. So I was about 30, 31, and I'd friends in Belfast that I DJ'd with, and they'd formed an electro duo. They initially called themselves Geiger, and then they opted for Basic after the computer language. And they would go around Northern Ireland playing with their sort of keyboards and computer bits and bobs anywhere a DJ could go. So they could just plug into the sound system and play that way. Like a kind of DIY orbital,
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, I'm rambling a bit about this. They get signed to this record label called Kitchen Recordings.
Yeah, Kitchen Recordings.
And, Kitchen Recordings, named after the Kitchen nightclub in Dublin City.
Yeah.
In the basement of the Clarence Hotel. And if you know about that hotel, it's owned by none other than kind of Bono and the Edge of U2. And this was their dance music label. And it was run by Bono's childhood friend, Reggie. And they signed Basic after receiving thousands of demos, dance music demos. And then they wanted, they talked about a music video. So Kimmo and I went away and made it. Mm-hmm. And just off our own bat, and they did this wonderful track called Greenback. And we did the video, and that one thing led to it. And it had lots of that elastic reality in the cutting. Mm-hmm. And we went over to Dublin, met up with Reggie, and we had no expectations. We showed it to him, and he went absolutely berserk and said, "This is just stunning," right? Blah, blah, blah. And then it had a life on MTV, and Zane Lowe was a presenter, primetime presenter on MTV in those days, and he even did a wee feature on the music video. And then the next thing we're approached by The Edge.
Oh, wow.
And he's saying, would you put a sort of like showreel thing together and send it to our offices? And I said, yeah, sure, but why? And he went, well, why might you think? And, well, are you kind of thinking we could kind of make a video for you folks? And he said, that's exactly why I'm asking you to do it. And I'm glad it came to nothing in the end.
Yeah, yeah. It was interesting to read that, because it goes back to how you started playing music. You weren't interested in playing live or doing it, being famous. You just loved playing music. And then fast forward to, making tunes for potentially Bono and Edge and all the rest of it. So it's like, what was that conversation? What was going through your head? I know you've said, well, why? But why are you pleased it didn't really happen?
Well, I mean, I would have been very pleased it happened for Kimmo. Because that would have been a huge opportunity for him. And I think if it had have happened, I think I'd have actually just stepped back and let him kind of go and do it with a budget. I wasn't really interested in the pressure. I mean, it's enough fun for me just to be able to tell the story, but I didn't want to get in. I mean, I realised that, I don't know, there's something about when the pressure kicks in that something then doesn't really become as interesting. And I had no ambitions to be a music video director whatsoever. And sure, you get curious about being on set and working with folk who are international celebrities, but it's not a world. I mean, for a few years, I could sort of go and stay in the Clarence Hotel from doing that work, and and it wasn't quite for free, but it would always be for sort of like strange amounts of money. Like I remember my girlfriend and I at the time going over and staying in the Clarence Hotel, and it was like £23.15 for the night. In this sort of 5-star deluxe, and you're thinking, £23.15, where did they get that from?
Yeah. And
I don't know what way that worked, but you get into that world, and I mean, it was lovely one evening meeting kind of Eno and Lanois, and having them saying nice things about your music video.
Yeah, I mean
now that there's a I mean,
that's
you do kind of that evening feel slightly high.
Yeah, you've got to be impressed with that.
Folk you've admired actually like something that you've done.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't really put a price on that.
No.
And but then it's odd. You get a little starstruck, and when you're a little starstruck, you don't kind of really know what to say. I mean, I think the first time I ever met a fully fledged hero was the folk who we didn't sign with. They had Debbie Harry on their roster in 1990, was it 91? I can't remember. So I got the opportunity to hang around with Debbie Harry when she was playing Belfast, and even sat next to her in a minibus. And the real tragedy of it is, it's like one of those people, that likes reading books but can't talk about what they've read. So you go, what did you think of that? Oh, it's a brilliant book. And so what did you think of it? It's a brilliant book. Yeah. And so Debbie Harry, what was she? I don't know. I was too scared to say anything. I didn't know what to ask her.
Right.
And I just was incredibly tongue-tied.
That happens,
And she was very, very sort of reserved speech-wise as well. You could sort of see that she kind of conserved her energy. But you know, I was incredibly starstruck because he was just sort of staring at these incredible cheekbones, and I think Parallel Lines was the first album I bought that was something that you might regard as cool. You know, of course I had records before that, but those are the records you didn't really want to admit to because those are your childhood records.
Yeah, of course.
And you know, and all of that. So that was so meeting people like that's always a bit strange because it's hard to put the power dynamic to one side.
Yeah,
I much prefer hanging around with creative people that you can sort of be more open with, and they can be more open in return. And that's a lot more fun than having that awkward thing called fame and celebrity.
Yeah,
creating the kind of barriers it does among people.
What you've just said there with getting tongue tied, maybe starstruck, and with Deborah Harry in the cab, it kind of reminds us of I've got this. I think I've still got it, an old VHS tape. I collect VHS tapes. You see, I've had them for absolute years, but I think I've got quite a rare one called Dynamite Chicken, and it's presented by Richard Pryor.
Oh wow!
And it's a real rare thing I've got, and it's just a video of sketches, like off the wall, like obscure, like a sketch that didn't really make it to Saturday Night Live, or was it Saturday Night Live?
Yeah.
So you got these like sketch show after sketch show after sketch show, and it's a bit of like nudity in there as well. It's a bit crude, some of it, but there's this one sketch that kind of reminds us of what you've just been saying, where a guy walks into a casting call. The director's sitting in the chair, and he's like, "Yeah, we're looking for this guy. He's a really heartbroken guy. He's lost his kids. He's divorced from his wife. Blah blah. Right? Can you be that guy? Yes, I can. So the guy's sitting there, and he's like, "Well, start whenever you want." Okay. Yeah, I'm feeling really down. Just he's acting bad, you know. The director looks at him. He's like, "Nah, thanks for coming, but I don't think you're going to cut it in this film." No, please. And then he kind of wakes up when he realises he can't get it. It's like, no, please. I've really got no money. I've been living on the streets for 2 weeks. Please, I really need this. And he's like, yeah, that's it. And it just goes on like that for ages. Every time the guy says action, he just can't act. But when he says you can't do it, then the acting comes out. Not acting, the real him came out. But it's kind of just reminded us of that.
That's a vital methodology though when it comes to directing too.
Yeah.
Because that takes us full circle back to Ken Loach again. Because trying to create ways to get people to not be acting. Yeah. Because you get sort of something very, very, very different. I mean, there was the day, I think, did I ever use it in your group? And I mean, it's a bit like by necessity. I end up trying to inject a bit of humour into a lecture. It doesn't always work, but. You forget which jokes you've told to which ears often, and then you forget which sort of stunts you've pulled. But when you try to explain that thing about improvisation, it's like, I mean, imagine I say you two all as a group and you're all being filmed, that I'm going to do something really shocking and you're going to have to look surprised. So 1, 2, 3, look surprised. Yeah. And then I go back into the lecture, and then just mid-sentence I just yell at them. Right. Just this big howl, and then go, "Fuck's sake!" I mean, the problem is that. I probably couldn't do that in today's health and safety world. Yeah. What if someone has a heart attack? But you're getting the sense that one is going to register on camera very, very, very differently than the other one. There's all of that. I suppose my thing in life is just a kind of, it's balancing sort of shyness and awkwardness with having to deliver material and to talk, and that's a tricky one. So so the kind of the video for Edge didn't work out. How did that come about to an end? That became, I think, one of those don't call us, call you. I mean, we didn't have enough of a show reel really to send them, because I mean, we put another video together for a basic track called The Video Age, But we only really had 2 tracks on it. And I think Reggie even said to me, the label boss, I mean, it's just a shame you didn't have one other thing. But by that stage, fashions were changing quickly. Kitchen Recordings, I think Kitchen offered Basic an album deal. They rejected the album deal for their own, for their own reasons. And then that was the end of them and Kitchen. And then they signed to another label called Reverb, and we made another video for them.
Right.
Not as good, I don't think, as the first one, and it didn't get the same life as the first one. So by that stage, things had sort of moved on, and yeah, that was the.
Yeah, and then obviously still teaching at Northumbria University, but then you co-wrote a book with Martin McLuhan, Hybridity.
Yeah, I mean, that came a bit sort of later. I mean, I think it was those early days. Northumbria was largely a teaching university, and research wasn't of the same importance in terms of income and so on. I mean, research now is a major part of how higher education institutions make their money. And universities now function less, I guess, as universities than as corporations. So there wasn't the same pressure to do research. I would write the odd thing, but there wasn't a great deal of time to do that. I was catching up and learning, teaching, and so on. And then I think around about 2000, I realised I didn't know anybody in Newcastle, hardly, apart from fellow staff, fellow colleagues who were friends, and students, some students who were more my age and friends. And I began to feel quite a claustrophobic sort of existence.
Right.
And it was only really through running events for the students' post-degree show thing, because I was very shocked that after the degree show, students just went to whatever house party or went to the pub or went wherever club. There was no after thing. Yeah. So I think we probably did it in your day, didn't we? We all cut the work up and had a night. And I started doing that in 1998, and we did it in the Riverside. Then went back then upstairs, and I thought that was this excitement about arriving in a new city. I thought, God, Newcastle's got lots of really interesting club spaces and interesting, and coming from a rural background in a campus university, I made the decision to live in the city centre. But through, I think, the last of those club nights, I got to meet and became friendly with local music producers and DJs, Frank Manseed, Smooth, and others. And I'm just delighted that those folk are my friends to this very, very day. Wonderful, wonderful folk. And that I began to then develop a social life and interests outside of university. In fact, Frank would end up doing some work with Basic. Frank would end up rapping with Basic in the Kitchen nightclub in Dublin, and staying in the Clarence. And Frank played Belfast on a couple of occasions, and I'd enjoy being involved in creative things sort of happening in the city, and that was really enjoyable. And then, but I still wasn't doing any DJing, and then. Bar called Popolo opened in 2002, and then myself, Frank, Smooth, others, we'd end up DJing in this place, and it was the changing in the licensing laws was happening in Newcastle. You remember it back in the old days, 11 o'clock, that was it. Yeah. And then you had to go to either somewhere like the Jazz Cafe if you wanted just to have another drink and pay in. Right. And that's if the late Keith Crombie let you in. Yeah. And
I think I got knocked back on there a few times.
Well, it was always quite arbitrary. And then you had the thing as well where you had to go and pay to get into a club. And then the licensing laws changed with New Labour, and Popolo was one of those bars that not only did cocktails and stayed open to 1, but it had DJs. But you could play all this music that was either before seen as too soundtracky, too chilled out, too cheesy, not rock and roll enough. So you could play a lot of jazz and a lot of bossa jazz, and French language hip hop and dub and reggae and broken beat and whatever. If it was any good and you could sort of stitch it together halfway well, and I thought this was really exciting.
Yeah,
you didn't have the pressure of having to keep people dancing. You could do a bit of that on weekend nights, but you could also, just make a soundtrack for the evening. Some of the folk that were playing in the place were so good that, sometimes I'd just go out to hear some of the DJs playing.
But that was also, for want of a better word, keeping your hand in with your teaching, because it was keeping your teaching relevant. Plus, you were in on the scene. You knew what was coming in, what was coming out, and then you were kind of, going back to university and talking about all this stuff that you're doing. So it's keeping you quite relevant within the context and the scene, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a better reason than the one I would have given.
Right.
It's and a grander sounding one, because I think it was really a way of having something else other than work, and having something that you look forward to outside of it. Because, I used to like going out in the city, but I preferred going out on a quiet weekday night. It was a bit of a shock to me as the kind of country bumpkin. I'd never seen the great Northeast kind of socialising of a weekend en masse. Everybody out in the streets at the same time for taxis.
Yeah.
Everybody kind of going into one place where the music was deafening and queuing to get there, drinking up and going on to the next place and doing the same thing again.
Yeah.
I'd never seen anything like that.
Yeah.
And I couldn't really get into doing anything like that. So, of course, I'm nostalgic for my early days in the city because I didn't know what was what. So you just went and tried out different places. I remember kind of drinking in the Black Garter and all the pubs like the Clock and stuff, and how I survived it. There's me, I looked a different kind of extreme in those days. I had like shaved hair and I always eyeliner.
Right.
I don't know whether you noticed that when I was wearing the eyeliner back in the days I was teaching you guys, and and all that, and
I think I noticed
and
that.
looked a bit extreme for in my own kind of wee way, and somehow I never got beaten up, and it's one of the things I have to say to Newcastle's credit. How many experiences have I had of anti-Irish racism in Tyneside in 25 years, nearly? One.
Right.
And that wasn't from someone from Newcastle. It was from a middle-class student at Durham University who referred to myself and my DJing friend Roger Braniff as a couple of paddies. And then when the big Northeast bouncer from Popolo heard that he'd said this, we just saw the guy being thrown up the street. Says, I'm not having any of that anti-Irish stuff in here or any of that. And that's quite an achievement for a city.
It
not is. One derogatory remark. Wow.
That's...
I can't say that about London.
That says a lot about Newcastle, doesn't it? You know what I mean? It's like London, on the other hand, is a completely different, tact altogether. But you actually... It's got a little segue to London because you actually got married. And then you kind of didn't move to London, but you were living this dual London, Newcastle. But you still taught at Northumbria. Yeah. I'm just curious to how did
I do that?
How did you do that?
Did it for 10 years.
10 years?
And I went to London in 2007. Love and marriage took me to London. I was really happy in London for that decade. It's an utterly remarkable city. It's just a shame that it's become such an expensive city.
Yeah.
And it's pricing a lot of young creative people out of it, particularly in those areas that were once upon a time bohemian areas like Notting Hill and Ladbroke Grove area where I lived, or Camden or wherever. Brixton, they're now gentrifying. So Notting Hill is... The house prices were just obscene.
Yeah, of course.
So once, I was basically commuting up and down every week when I'd teaching on. Now, you couldn't have done it if you were in a conventional 9 to 5.
Yeah.
But I was able to do it for a while. And then I also had sabbaticals, and that's when... And see, 2007 was important for two reasons in my life, I guess. I got married and moved to London, but also I became part of film and TV studies.
Yeah.
And then research was on the table. And that meant that research was being prioritised. And I started then to be able to really... You've got support to start writing books. You've got reasons to be writing books. And then that's when the book you referred to... Rock and Popular Music in Ireland, Before and After U2. It came out in 2012. It took about 4 years to write, from about 2008 to 2012.
Right.
And that was a big sea change for me, because I think I found if life's always about looking, Cliff, into to find who you are and what you're into.
Yeah.
That was it was more important for that reason. It's like, right, okay, that's really what I should be doing. I mean, there's that lovely phrase about John Savage quotes from John Lennon, where an interviewer says to the young Lennon, so how do you spend your day if you're not kind of in the studio? He said, well, I spend most of my day finding out what I think I should be doing. Yeah. And you can map that to your life. You can spend a lot of your life trying to figure out what you should be doing. And should I be DJing? And I loved DJing, don't get me wrong. I absolutely loved it. And I was very flattered that I started off playing once a week for fun. And then by the time I'd moved to London, I was kind of grateful to stop DJing, because I was playing 5-6 nights a week. And that's great, but there's a moment where that stops being fun. Sometimes I think the very best night you have as a DJ is when you don't think you're a DJ. It's the first night you play, and you just play a lot of good records that you haven't heard out before, and you try and play them in some kind of order. Then after that, you kind of then keep becoming the professional DJ. You're thinking about what you're going to be playing, and I just love listening to music now without ever having to think about what I'm going to be playing. But yeah, I think writing is what I enjoy most, and I feel it's kind of most me. I like writing and researching. There's a real challenge in it, because you start off and you just feel incredibly stupid. Doesn't matter how many articles you've written or how decorated your books are, but you start off and you feel really stupid, because it takes a long, long time to see any clarity in the research and building a story. And then once you get the rock pushed up a hill to a certain degree, then you can start to play with the material a bit more and begin to work with it. And I like that bit probably most. But you certainly don't go into it thinking, hey, I'm really clever. It's the reverse. But there's a satisfaction in getting something finished as well as you can. Although I'm very pleased with the last book, but it now goes off into the world to fend for itself, and I'm not there to speak for it.
Oh, yeah, it's like a little kid, isn't it?
You can't please everybody. Yeah. So, but it's worth doing for its own sake.
It's just rock and popular music in Ireland before and after U2 was regarded as definitive. I think that's quite nice to read. And Irish Embassy in London has an event in honour of the book.
Those were remarkable things, Cliff. I mean, you don't set out to write. You set out to write something hoping that you'll do a good job. You're never really ultimately sure. But I'm glad it did well for the university, and it did well in what they call the research evaluation framework, and because all that work's scored and it affects Northumbria's place in the league table. Yeah. And Northumbria's place in the league table shapes how many students we get, what income we get, and it's all now about universities competing with one another. Right. I wish it wasn't like that, but that's the world we're in. So if you play a small part in keeping that world going, and you live another day like to write another book, keep your research entitlement alive, that's a big game to play for. But if the biggest thing though is if the work feeds out into the broader culture and folk find value in the book, and it was very well received, and then that's pressure for the next time. Can you do that?
Can
again?
you top that? Yeah.
Yeah, but I suppose as an Irish person who's lived in England now for a quarter of a century, it is quite something to be invited by the Irish ambassador for the UK to go to Belgravia and be entertained and speak about your book, and meet members of the Undertones and all of that.
Oh, it's brilliant.
You have there's a bit of pride in that.
Of course it is.
But I suppose I'm not a natural. I wouldn't be very good in one of those sort of Richard and Judy book launch things, or book promotion shows, because it's easier to talk about when it's the ideas than it is the kind of the accolades.
Yeah.
I'm just pleased that I suppose someone that, I say this to students, it wasn't easy for me to find my place here. It didn't happen by magic. I'm not some person who was destined to lecture in a university. I mean, I have imposter syndrome as much as anyone else, where someone's going to come up and tap me in the shoulder and say, "We've rumbled you, you shouldn't be here." I'm just pleased to have found my place through, because I often wonder, what could I have coped with? What else could I have coped with? What else might I be reasonably good at? And you just feel pleased from an individual personal perspective that you've survived to get into something that you can function in and survive in.
Well, it's like you just said, that, I mean, you're on a journey, like we're all on a journey now, and 10, 20 years time, you don't know what you're going to be doing. It's like, but every step, like Dr. Martin Luther King, it's like, if you can't see the whole staircase, just take the first step. And then when you get there, you'll maybe see where you're going. So you have to take that first step. I'm not saying you're taking first steps, but in the grand scale of the world and your mind, those first couple of steps could be your music, your university, your books. Who knows what you're going to do? You know what I mean?
Well, my dad, who's the gentlest soul in the world and the most encouraging human being, I mean, he would, if it was in his power to do something for someone that would help them, he not only would do it, he's done it consistently. And but he'd always tell the story when I was, to people, well, Noel was talking early but walking late. And I think that sort of becomes a metaphor for me.
Wow. Nice.
I think my ability to express things was ahead of my my ability to realise them sometimes. And so I'm always in a way sort of playing a bit of catch up with myself. It took me, pretty much into my late 30s to find my voice as a writer. I mean, I wrote stuff before then, but I was fumbling around. I was trying to second guess other people, trying to second guess what was good. Not that I think everything from that era was particularly bad, but maybe this is I think one of the things about growing older is you realise how stupid we all are, really. Wisdom resides in knowing that life can make fools of us some of the time, and it takes some of the self-consciousness out of you. I'm a lot less anxious about being cool or any of that sort of stuff, and there's a freedom that goes with that, where you feel then you can. It's too late now. I'm going to write. I'm going to see what my voice in this is actually like, rather than me trying to second guess and be like another writer that I admire. Just try and figure out, if it doesn't sound too pretentious, what your own voice is, and trust that. And then the thing itself becomes a lot more enjoyable.
Yeah, of course.
And you can do that with DJing or anything. You can try to be, I always would watch other people in awe. I mean, I thought I knew post-punk electronica. Then you spend a night DJing with Mick Clark, and then you realise that you've been sort of paddling in the shores, you know, or if you think you're sort of good, you get reasonably good technically, then you look at, you know, someone like sort of Mike Bandoni, or and then if you think that you've got an ample collection that's explored enough stuff, you know, then you look at sort of Smooth's record collection, and you're kind of dabbling a bit,
Right.
and then you just have to find, well, what do I like doing? It's for good or for ill. It's the way that I do it. But I mean, I loved playing in Newcastle because you had to work an awful lot harder than when I DJed in London. And when I started DJing in London about 2011, in this phenomenal little pub in Notting Hill called The Cow. I mean, you didn't have to work as hard. You could sort of play a version of a good wedding disco.
And you weren't in a booth?
No. You were
at the bar.
Just on the bar.
Yeah.
You were just at the bar. People would come and talk to you. That was great. I loved that. Often folk didn't even know you were DJing. There was a DJ. But I mean, that's the only place I think I've ever played in where I had one night I had absolutely everybody dancing.
Wow.
And they were all dancing on the furniture, and they were dancing on the furniture outside. And of course, typical DJ neurosis, I couldn't really enjoy the moment because sometimes you don't seem to be enjoying the fact that everybody inside's doing all this. And I said, well, because the only way is down. Yeah. You know, how do you keep that going? But that was fun because there wasn't the same sort of labour involved in having to dig out obscurities and having to stay on trend with, you know, it was more, is it fun, is it eclectic? So you were jumping from dub and reggae to you know, Stones singles from the early 60s to, you know, post-punk anthems. It was more like a sort of pop mashup disco. Yeah. But that came really, really easily to me. And I quite enjoyed the fact it didn't require the same, you know, shopping online for obscure records and spending hours down at RPM and, you know, or shopping at Honest John's. It wasn't the same vogue for obscurities and unknowns. And I quite enjoyed the fact that it was a lot looser.
Yeah, I mean, the Cow, it's kind of an old traditional pub, like where you can get like, it's like this really cool place of like pie and peas kind of earthy pub, like traditional London Cockney pub. But the people who were coming in weren't your ordinary people. You're getting people like Tom Cruise, like waltzing in, and David Beckham and Stella McCartney, and I mean,
it's like every pub should be. It was a pub that had painters and decorators and celebrities and all that sitting cheek by jowl, and they all in a way knew each other, and no one ever really bothered each other. But I mean, it was one of those sort of rules the place had, that you don't start photographing people and all that stuff. It was a very friendly, very, very friendly kind of environment, very welcoming, and people were very appreciative of the Cow because it was, you know, pubs were sort of dying in Notting Hill. Good pubs were dying. I mean, I remember I moved back to Newcastle in end of 2016. I was back down in Notting Hill about a year later, I remember, and I couldn't believe how many things had closed down. Right. With the rents racking up, and you know, even some sort of shishi establishments had hit the wall. And I mean, you know, I always think, I'm a great lover of a good pub. Yeah. Because they're more than just a place that sells alcohol. Yeah. They're kind of part community centre, part therapy centre, you know, part news stand. They stand in. If they weren't there, life would be a lot more alienated, especially in a world now where even without a lockdown, folk are used to getting their groceries delivered and not supporting local shops. And,
Yeah.
you know, there's a whole ecosystem there that I think is very important. And, I mean, London, always has a sort of a bad rep for many folk in the north, but I generally find kind of, you know, what's good about English people is that they fly the flag well for what's good about humanity in general. You know, and I mean, weirdly, the kind of, you know, I think being an asshole doesn't work on a national basis. I mean, you get assholes everywhere and all of that, and people who go out of their way to be nasty, to vilify other people. But I find in my time here, folk incredibly friendly. I can't imagine not having lived here for 20-something years, because it's been really fantastic. And of course, you get periods of life that you want to sleep through, and they're not. But that's not down to people. That can just be often bad choices in other areas of life. But whether London or Newcastle, I've found folk generally, it's been really enjoyable and welcoming and optimistic, and I find London a lot more communitarian than I actually thought.
So the cow was in Notting Hill, and then I haven't actually been in the cow. I've been on the website and had a look around, and I quite like the website. And it's got a couple of shots like celebrities in there. Like I think I've seen Tom Cruise and David Beckham in the same shot in the pub. But could you talk to us about how you ended up playing Stella McCartney's Christmas party, a private Christmas party?
Oh, well, you see, I was travelling back down from Newcastle, and I'd done my week's work, and I was really tired. And you know, more often than not, sometimes the train gets delayed, and I'm a smoker, so not being able to smoke and the train being delayed is a double kind of whammy. But that sounds really nostalgic, talking about trains and smoking, and because they were back in the days we could go places.
Yeah.
But I'd also look forward to getting, and it was the last week of term before Christmas, and all I wanted to do was I had this routine: get off at King's Cross, get in the Underground, you know, take the Hammersmith and City line off, get off at Royal Oak, wheel my bag down, straight into the Cow, even before I go home.
Straight at the Cow, yeah.
Straight to the Cow. Might even do some DJing that night, and have a few pints, and it's come up to Christmas, work's done. We get to the Cow and the door's locked, and barman comes out. Oh, so it's Stella McCartney's Christmas party, you know, invite only job. And they went, oh, okay. So I'm really disappointed. I've been in a delayed train and all that. But I go across the road to the bar across the road to Westbourne. And of course, everybody that's a local in the Cow that couldn't get in sitting over there. Of course, the only subject of conversation is the fact that they prefer to be over there and couldn't get in and all that. You know, like people are, oh, man, party, oh no, I want to. Anyway, Pedro, the head barman, finds me in the Cow and says, do you not answer your phone? I go, no, sorry, I have it switched. I like the quiet coach in the train, so I had my phone switched to silent. Anyway, what's it? Oh, Stella McCartney's really crestfallen. She saw that you didn't get in, and she'd like you to come and do the DJing downstairs.
Oh, wow.
And Akio, your friend, who incidentally used to work with Peter Saville, you know, he did the Blue Monday cover.
Right.
Great graphic designer. One of the folk I really, really miss, but I'm rambling again. So we go over, and this is kind of quite surreal, thinking, oh, we're Stella McCartney's kind of party. And I don't know Stella McCartney very well. You know, we just know each other kind of, for years. I'm crap with celebrities. I just thought this was a nice woman called Stella.
Yeah.
And I think after about a year I found out, that Stella McCartney. Oh, okay. And I prefer it's that way around, because then you just become friends with people, and you just get on.
Oh, so you didn't realise?
No, but for about the first year I lived in Notting Hill, I just thought she was Stella, and I mean that genuinely. And then I found out that Stella was Stella McCartney. And I mean, I'm so bad with celebrity. I actually thought for years that Jordan and Katie Price were different people.
Oh, all right,
Just
yeah.
because I heard these names bandied around and didn't know that. They
Yeah.
were. So, but it's good to keep your head out of celebrity type stuff. Isn't it?
I think they probably are in her head. I mean,
Who knows?
you know, but
Who knows?
I can kind of get where you come from with that. But
No, but I mean, the lovely thing was I sort of DJ'd and thought this was a bit surreal, and I sat up and I said, "Aki, would you mind looking after my gear there? Well, I just haven't smoked enough cigarettes."
yeah,
So I wanted to go out, and it's a short walk, you know, just from me to you, pretty much from where you DJ to the front door.
mm-hmm.
So I just go, and next thing I just pull the door open, and there's a guy. You know, the timing thing. He's tried to push the door,
coming,
and
yeah.
he's just missed it because I pulled the door open.
Got you.
He nearly fell into the place.
All right.
Wasn't a good look. Good job there was no paparazzi out there because it was Bono.
Oh wow.
And I just went, "Oh, mind your step there, fella." And then he comes in, and then he's followed by Penelope Cruz, Kylie Minogue, and being a post-punk kid from back in the day, his friend Gavin Friday, who was this, you know, friend at the Virgin Prunes.
Right.
So I thought, okay. And then I looked round at Akio. He looks, this is not going to be an ordinary night.
Yeah.
So I end up kind of DJing with this sort of, for this kind of all these folk around, and then folk know that I'd made the video for U2's thing years ago, and so they're wondering, when am I going to speak? It's a bit of a theatre for everybody. When am I going to speak to Bono? When's that moment going to happen? And well, I didn't have any great desire to speak to Bono, but then it kind of sort of, I can't remember exactly what happened, but his minder was sitting down with us while we were DJing, and he was just sitting there, so we were yarning away with him, and then I think Bono came into the conversation through that, and then I got talking to the bouncer, and it was, oh yeah, you're so da-da-da. And then talk about faux pas, I ended up, you know, this was the time that there was all the hoo-ha about U2 not paying their tax.
Mm.
So we ended up having an argument about tax.
Oh wow. So you were rowing with them.
And I wasn't...
Not
no,
shouting.
no, I wasn't doing any of that. I mean, it was just basically, I said, look, I mean, it's really, really crazy because, I mean, surely from your own PR perspective, and I'm not saying that's the best motivation, but surely wherever you're kind of like not paying in tax, you're paying in PR, because you must know that your reputation, particularly among English music fans, is pretty much as low as you could go.
It was actually getting. I was reading about U2, and they were, you know, the biggest band in the world, and then about it just so happens the time when you were having this row with them, they were starting to go on the slide. I feel because I read this quote, like they were one of the most hated bands in the world at one point, but one of the best loved, then the most hated bands in the world.
Well, I think he did a clever enough response to that, because sure, like, I mean, we're not exactly kind of loved in our hometown either, and I mean, and so we went through this thing, and I said, look, but I mean, relative to your income, would it not be better just for all concerned? Would it not be more of an everybody wins scenario? And he said, look, what you have to understand is that, I mean, what's the exact phrase he used? Yeah, our tax arrangements are wholly commensurate with EU law. And I thought, what a phrase, wholly commensurate with EU law. So I was kind of processing this, and he kind of looked at me as if to say, something wrong with that? And I kind of went, yeah, I'm just sort of thinking about it. It's like, it's because, I mean, I'm of a generation where I can remember growing up with your music, and for us there was a great deal of pride that, I mean, I didn't like U2 as much as the sort of the more electronic bands when I was younger, but that's neither here nor there. But there was this pride in them, a band from Ireland that was good, that had that energy, and a kind of charismatic frontman and all of that. And so I remember just sort of thinking, yeah, you just sound less like the guy that used to inspire young folk of my generation who were Irish, and now you just sound more like your lawyer. And then he went, okay, so what would you do if you were me? I'd pay my tax.
Mm-hmm.
And then he left, and he left in a real hurry. And Pedro, the barman, he thought this really, he did the kind of the theatre of pretend to take away some of the bar furniture in case we were going to use it as weapons. But it was just a bit of theatre. It was a bit of fun to try and sort of soften it. But he left so quickly that he left his kind of bespoke jacket behind. And then the overall bar manager, who's incidentally Irish, he thought, great, I'm going to have that auctioned on eBay. It's going to be my fortune. Of course, somebody was sent to retrieve the jacket.
Oh, someone sent it. His doorman was sent again.
Yeah, but I mean, I really wasn't being a smart ass. It was just, I was really, like anybody, I was just quite, I just don't understand why the super rich need to evade tax.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not suggesting that we return to the days of the Beatles where under Harold Wilson, the Beatles were paying 90% of their income in tax.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's 90p out of every pound in tax.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't stop the Beatles becoming incredibly rich.
Yeah, of course.
But there seems to be this dual rule where folk are left scrambling around. And the threshold of now scrambling around has affected even those who used to sort of be security middle class and had some distance from anxiety. But I think a lot of us are scrambling around while the sort of the super rich get a free pass. And you know, I believe in taxation that way. I mean, I think there's a debate about what you do with tax. I don't want to get people paying tax for unjust wars. But if taxation starts to protect and preserve public bodies, if it could have protected higher education remaining in the public sector, if it stops the National Health Service getting privatised, let's get on with it. I mean, but you'd have to have particular nations all agreeing to instigate this, because of course then that all you need is one tax haven and those companies will base themselves there. And I just think that's corrupt. That's what's wrong at the heart of capitalism.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, I've gone off on a. I've gone off on a slight soapbox with that, which I didn't kind of.
It's absolutely
really
cool.
intend to.
I'm just trying to think. I've just got a picture of Bono just wearing his cowboy hat and boots, but of course, and I'm just wondering, do you think he recognised it at all from?
No, I didn't even.
That.
No, I didn't. I didn't even say who I was from back in the day, because I'd met Bono with through Eamon from Basic and stuff way back, but there's no. I mean, there's no. You know. It's an undignified conversation, isn't to go in and say, "Oh, remember me? Once upon a time made a video for your dance label."
I just thought he might have just looked and went, "Oh yeah," and maybe put two and two together when you start chatting. Like, you know how people just have penny drops, and it's like, I remember you.
But even if he did, I think I looked kind of a bit different, you know, from those days. So.
It's I'm interested to hear your opinion on when because like I'm a bit of a fan of you too, but not how can I put it, not so much the early stuff. I've really got into them. You're probably going to hear this and go, but I really got into them post Rattle and Hum when because I'm kind of really interested in when brands reinvent themselves. And I'm, I find that when they reinvented themselves and done the Zoo TV and the Achtung Baby album and all the rest of it, I kind of thought they hit the nail on the head. And
I think
I'm just interested to hear what you think about.
Yeah, I think that's to many that's certainly their finest moment, and I think it's the fact that it's such a radical reinvention.
Yeah.
I mean, there aren't many reinventions that are quite such a pendulum swing.
Yeah.
And that occur on that kind of scale.
Yes.
I mean, Irish rock and popular music generally at that point in time was never really associated with playfulness and plasticity and electronica, and I mean it was a sort of novel kind of stadium krautrock almost that they dabbled in.
Mick talks about that as well. Yeah.
Well, I mean, one of the things I was very flattered about when Rock and Pop in Ireland came out was that Mick actually read the whole thing, and I was glad he liked some of the arguments in the book about that Achtung Baby, Zoo TV, Zooropa kind of period. But then where do you go after such a reinvention?
Yeah.
It's I mean, there's only so much stylistic novelty that rock and pop can really incorporate to the point where novelty itself and reinvention, as Bowie discovered, becomes expected. And then you have the Prince problematic, where you're just so utterly talented that consumers get bored with the fact that you're just incredibly talented. And then you're into that. Well, that album wasn't as good as the last one, and you're into that sort of cul-de-sac. Music's incredibly fickle, but I suppose I'm very attracted when music and politics meet, and I don't mean politics with a capital P, but politics in terms of smaller scale representational politics of meaning, politics of style and sound, and I mean the Zoo TV thing was important for taking a hand grenade to the usual repertoire of Irish imagery, among many other things. You don't often, as I say, get Ireland associated with modernity and science fiction. And I mean, I was showing actually some of the students that in a third year module I teach. I was showing them some of the opening of Zoo TV.
Oh, brilliant!
Just to show the scale of what was going on with the big global artists at the time that were forced into playing stadiums in the political economy of the time, and you see this thing that looks like Blade Runner. It's clearly very much inspired by the sets for that, magnificent neo-noir sci-fi film. And that playfulness is a lot of fun. Just
the cutting and the juxtapositioning of everything. For want of a better word, it's just like a regurgitation of all kinds of media just thrown at you. What I really loved about it is it had two things going on at the same time, where the guy underneath the stage was kind of a journalistic approach to it, where you didn't really know what was going on, but there was like a narrative with the songs, and then him chatting about, we're playing live upstairs, and then he was actually talking about something quite different about the technology and how many miles of cable are going through you, and this is what we're
also
doing.
open about the fact that they've got people kind of manning the computers and the sequencers to make, so it's not just the four guys on stage. There's an underground crew of people making the sound. I mean, that was really novel back in I think in 1991, 92 to reveal the edifice. I mean, it was a collective thing in another way, because Eno and Kevin Godley and other people were involved in the kind of the creation of that Zoo TV extravaganza, and a set designer called Wiliams. And it's another sort of testament to the power of collaboration. But then where do you go after such an extravaganza? Where do you go if you're Prince and you've just done Sign of the Times, the tour? It's all sorts of difficulties. And then you find this odd trajectory when you've made your best work. Then when is it that you sort of then all happens to the Rolling Stones? Folk just want to really hear the greatest hits.
I'm just here to hear the
folk want sort of I mean, it's a real problem, and I mean, who goes along to the Stones gigs wanting to hear stuff from the last album? It's, they want the Gimme Shelter and sort of like it's kind of like Gimme Shelter to Start Me Up is that sort of era. Play all of that, please, and maybe throw in Love Is Strong or something from the 90s. But it's a hard one for folk to escape. Well,
the whole Zoo TV thing always also reminded us of a guy called Josh Harris, and he made a film, We Live in Public.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of reminded us of that underground society of people caught sort of precursor to Big Brother kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was quite interesting. I just wanted to hear what you thought about U2, and
Well, I think
I was interested.
I always think like I'm a sort of like most, hopefully like most sort of Irish folk. I kind of love them and loathe them in equal measure.
Yeah.
It depends on the. I mean, for a long time, I think it. I mean, the flip side to them having this sort of sense of pride as a youngster of, you know, an Irish band getting into the firmament was a really important thing. You know, that was modern and, you know, could sort of hold their own alongside sort of Joy Division and some of the, you know, I mean, Joy Division fans are going to balk when you hear that, you know, go, oh, no, you two were never as good as Joy Division. I mean, these things to a degree are always subjective. It's all, you know, you'll find your detractors and your praisers and so on. But it was that sense that playing a role that you know, once upon a time, you know, one of the most globally successful groups was an Irish group, because you didn't have the same long history of it, where it was kind of routine in the way that had been the case in Britain ever since the British invasion that was set in motion by the Beatles in early 1964. But there's been a whole sea of, you know, British acts that were popular in America and critically lauded. So U2 were important in that way. Yeah. But then, you know, it's like a lot of other things. It sets a template. And I remember living in Dublin around about some point in the 1980s. I was down there for a while. It was 89, can't remember. But I just remember wanted to try and find a quiet pub where there wasn't someone that was doing either U2 covers or sounded like a bad version of U2, playing full pelt in a pub. And it sort of set this sort of template for what a kind of an Irish sound would be. You know, edge type guitar, spacious, windswept sounding. And you thought, oh God, you know, it's like the Alan Partridge line. There's more to Ireland than this. You know, you were thinking, yeah, there's got to be more Ireland than this fucking sound. And you know, so it's like a diversity of means is really, really helpful. I mean things are a lot more interesting, I think, in Ireland and Northern Ireland now musically, because of the big record companies don't have it their way. So you've got lots of smaller record labels managing to survive doing business through other networks. And I think there's probably still too many Irish sensitive singer-songwriters. That seems to be a form that we I mean, and it's an odd paradox, isn't it? This is supposed to be quite individualistic, the individual singer-songwriter, but yet it's a form we remake with a certain regularity. Always very emotional, and that becomes the sort of the Irish trademark. I mean, again, diversity of means is good, but there's a lot of interesting other stuff going on. But I probably know as much about what's going on in Newcastle musically as I do about Belfast. Right. It's different when you get to the 1960s, of course, because I've been kind of living in the 1960s because of the present book for the last sort of 5 years. Right. So that's...
No, so you're still in London, you still DJing, you're kind of in between Newcastle and London, but you were writing a lot of articles about Brian Eno.
Yeah, no, well, I wrote one piece on Brian Eno, which I was very flattered to do. It came out in two forms, though. It came out in a lovely collection, just called Brian Eno Oblique Music. Because Brian Eno, weirdly, in sort of academic criticism, popular music studies and popular music history, isn't as widely written about as you'd think. Yeah. So I was flattered to contribute a chapter to that book about his relationship with Ireland, because, you know, I mean, whatever one thinks of Eno's collaboration with U2, he's made more albums with U2 than any other collaboration. And also it's one he talks about himself very, very fondly.
Wow.
But it doesn't have the same sort of critical purchase, say, as his albums with, I don't know, Robert Fripp, or the 3 albums he produced for Talking Heads, or his work with early Roxy Music. But I mean, I think it's an interesting collaboration, so I tried to have a go about, writing about that. But I've always loved the sort of the company of musicians. I mean, DJs and musicians. I mean, Frank Manseed's as versatile and clever a vocalist and lyricist as I've come across anywhere. And you learn a lot from friendship with musicians and the way that they think and work. And I try to fold that into the way that I approach music as a writer. I think the way folk approach production is an important part of the story, rather than just sort of, trying to kind of read the music off the surface, as it were. I'm interested in music's relationship to history, and it's exciting also when you over the years you make friends with folk who've worked in music for a long time, like Frank, like my late friend Roger Pomphrey, a friend of mine Gregory Gray. Sadly, those last 2 figures have passed away. But musicians are amazing to learn things from, and the way that they set about doing their work, particularly if they've sustained a career making music over a long period of time.
You probably know this more than me, Noel, but was Brian Eno kind of an innovator of ambient music?
I think it's his sort of it's
kind of coined the phrase.
I think he coined the phrase. I mean, there's certainly a form of music that's meditative and minimalist and lauds the non-musician. There's a long tradition of that in advance of Eno, but Eno certainly did popularise the notion of ambient music, particularly with music for films. And I love that work, partly because I'm in lockdown and I can work to it, and it gets you in a sort of an interesting meditative space, and much as I sort of love funk and soul, if it's a bit too raucous, it doesn't kind of work in the middle of the day if I'm trying to kind of compose something. So it's all about kind of music and context.
Do you? I'm just trying to get these out quickly.
Don't rush it, Cliff. We can just sort of I'm beginning to ramble a wee bit anyway, I think.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I don't know if you're aware of the story about Brian Eno. Talks about how kind of ambient music came about when he got hit by a cab. He got knocked down.
I don't know that story at all. No.
All right, I know a story that you don't know about. Wow.
Oh no. No, that's I'm easy to catch out with stuff like that. Don't worry.
He got. I just thought I'd swing this by you. He got hit by a cab in 1975. He was, I don't know if he went to hospital, but he couldn't walk, or he was bedridden. His girlfriend brought him a record of harp music. So they put that on a record player. And then as he was so ill in bed, the record player only had one channel. It didn't work so good, and the volume was so low down, and he couldn't get up out of bed to turn it up. So it kind of invented his different way of hearing. So he was hearing this harp music, and then he says it paved the way for an idea of ambient music, where he would hear the natural things outside. So he'd hear the rain, he would hear the wind, he would hear the hustle and bustle of the city mixed with this harp music, and that's what gave him the inspiration for ambient music.
Oh, that's a wonderful story.
So I just thought I'd share that with you.
There were wee parts of that seemed familiar to me, particularly when you mentioned the idea of the harp music and it being far away. I mean, I don't know whether I read that in sleeve notes or read that somewhere in the past. I mean, there's a wonderful somebody Shepherd that who wrote I think it's the most complete sort of biography of Eno, and it's I haven't read it for years, but it's one of those, I like rereading stuff if it's any good.
Yeah.
So I might go back and
You should have
explore that again.
Yeah.
But it's a strange thing when you get to a certain age, Cliff, really, because you realise that when you're younger, you think that you're going to be able to dabble in life in a lot more than time really affords you. I mean, I wonder how many more books I'll have the opportunity to write. And then I often ask myself, I wonder if I'll ever have the opportunity to DJ again, let alone DJ regularly, or do I want to? And it's odd, you know, because when you're young, of course, you think you might be a deep sea diver, you might be a train driver, you might, you know, you might sort of be an astronaut. And the world seems full of all these different roles that you could play. And you get to a point, I think, where you begin to, you know, especially when you've lived through something like this COVID thing, you think, God, life is so contingent and so fragile, and a lot shorter. And I'm just, you know, I'm just pleased, I think, more than anything else, to have the opportunity to be able to do some things that I've greatly enjoyed. Because even getting the chance to do something that you greatly enjoy, you often feel, do you ever feel like you're fighting in life to get close to something that you want to be doing, but the world's continually holding you back from getting there?
Of course,
And I mean, God, I hope that doesn't sound self-satisfied. It's not meant to sound like that at all. It's just, I'd like to think I've got another, maybe another book.
I'm sure you have.
What it'll be about, I don't know. I mean, I started to write a little bit about life under lockdown, and then I lost track of doing that. I didn't know what forum to do it for, and it also seemed a little bit narcissistic and navel gazing because, well, you know, by necessity inside, and but writing kind of helps to make sense of things, even if you never intend to publish it, or it always helps explain something.
Oh yeah, of course. You actually wrote obituary for Roger Pomphrey in the Guardian.
Yeah.
I just thought that this is worth mentioning because I know he was a good friend of yours.
Oh, he was a wonderful, wonderful human being. I mean, I think. Humorous, generous, very, very talented musician. He was the first guitarist in Eurythmics.
In the Rhythmics,
I mean, Dave Stewart's a mean guitarist.
Yeah.
But he went to play bass, and Roger played the lead guitar, and the rhythm section was Clem Burke of Blondie, and then Holger Zucchi from Cannes was doing electronics and flugelhorn with the band. So these were his bandmates, and then he left Eurythmics, and of course they went on to become global with Sweet Dreams. But he ended up, I think he also wrote Terence Trent D'Arby's Wishing Well, but was never credited for it.
I've seen that,
And then, bless him, he became a music filmmaker.
Yeah.
Made some wonderful stuff. My favourites, The Alchemists of Sound, a documentary he made about the BBC Radiophonic Workshop and Delia Derbyshire, and that's a very innovative and interesting piece of work. But yeah, he was just a great friend.
I hate to interrupt, but he also directed Massive Attack's
first video. Yeah,
first show.
I mean, they were. I'd forgotten about that, Cliff.
Yeah.
How could I forget about that? And it's odd. I've been in Roger's company with members of Massive Attack, and they all, I mean, at Roger's funeral, they all confessed to me that we all still kind of look up to him as a father figure, because he advised us about not just making videos, but aspects of, you know, how to kind of set about collaborating, because we were a collective that didn't have a lead singer, and in those days we weren't associated with any particular instruments. Our music was sample based. So Roger was a real innovator, but a generous friend. But I didn't set out to write his obit for The Guardian. It was I wanted another late friend, the great music writer Dave Lang, to do it. I mean, you should look at Dave's written a lot of obits on music for The Guardian, and they're beautifully written and they're very entertaining.
All right.
But I sort of worked it up for Dave to do the research, and he said, no, well, I've presented it to The Guardian, and I pitched it to them that you should do it, and I ended up writing it, and then you feel the pressure.
Yeah.
You have to do your friend justice, and I'm not used to writing within about 500-600 words, which is all you've got. Then how do you make an interesting career not sound like a CV? How do you inject the personality into it? So there was a set of issues around getting all that right, but it was Roger passed away at the start of 2014. London, in some ways, it wasn't really the same. But through him, I met a lot of very interesting folk, and he used to direct a series called Rotten Hill TV for the Rotten Hill Gang. And anyone out there who's listening, I mean, go and Google the Rotten Hill Gang. I think it's particular favourites. They do a cover of Submission by the Sex Pistols on YouTube, and it's actually Glenn Matlock and Steve Jones, Glenn Matlock and Paul Cook, the original Sex Pistols rhythm section, or the rhythm section for this, because the Rotten Hill Gang pulled in a lot of old punk.
I've seen it on YouTube.
Aristocracy, and I mean, all those folk all are very dear friends, and sort of Mick Jones is kind of like the godfather of sorts of the Rotten Hill Gang, and the wonderful Gary McPherson, and Holly Cook and others. I just love the spirit, because they make music for the right reasons. They're not interested in being signed. They're interested in just keeping going and having a bit of creative independence. Yeah, releasing stuff when they can, but a lot of it's about community events and keeping things going around the area. And I hate to use the cliche, keeping it real, but they're kind of doing that, and that's a very valuable thing. Especially when you get older, because you're supposed to sort of go out to pasture, aren't you? But they all kind of keep it pretty vital. Yeah, they're still going.
I subscribe to the YouTube channel, and there seems to be a band there now, like a band that are doing quite a lot of stuff. But
well, the Rotten Hill Gang are, I love, it's a great name for a band. Sort of, it's got the Anthill Mob, wacky races kind of feel about it, but it's also, I like the mixing up Rotten with Notting Hill in a way, because it has a spark of critique against gentrification and all of that. And Mick Jones is a gentle and kind soul, and I mean, it's a bit of a shock. I mean, I don't want to sound too starstruck, but it's an odd thing to be sitting DJing in the car, and you've got Mick Jones standing next to you, kind of having his pint and enjoying the music. And then asking him to make a wee compilation tape of some stuff if he doesn't know it. But I mean, the most important thing is it's not that folk are celebrities or historically famous. It's just nice when people are creative and interesting, and they have a modicum of interest in yourself, and that works like that. It's part of keeping curious and keeping life adventurous, and trying to keep the inner kid in yourself, so that you don't become too cynical and adult and world weary, and that's a challenge for all of us.
Of course it is. Of course it is. No, we'll kind of come towards the end, but it's been absolutely brilliant.
Cliff, thank you very much, and I'm sorry if I rambled on too arbitrarily, but thank you very, very, very much, and I think you're the only person who could possibly kind of coax me out of the house.
Oh, really?
But sorry, you have to be sitting here wearing a kind of a silly visor. You can tell I'm not used to it, because I keep kind of going to scratch the tip of my, I keep going to scratch the tip of my nose or something, and it's and I forget that it's here.
Just before we all split and go off into the night, Could you just tell about your latest book, Noel?
It'd be my pleasure.
How Belfast Got the Blues.
Yeah, How Belfast Got the Blues, a cultural history of the 1960s. It's a very much a music and politics book. It's not a local interest book where you're going to read about Belfast bands that you never heard about. It actually it uses one city to go into the broader story of the relationship between music and politics, both sides of the Atlantic in the 1960s. Music's connection to civil rights, music's connection to the Northern Ireland state. Tells some stories not widely known, such as the Rolling Stones' relationship to Belfast and how Belfast might have played a role in the Stones becoming public enemy number one. How the Stones played in the city 3 times in 18 months and never returned after September 1965.
All right.
There's a lot of intrigue there, and tells the story of one particular female blues singer that might be knowledge to some blues collectors, but she's an important part of our Belfast story because she was there ahead of Van Morrison, basically. And most folk could be forgiven for thinking that, first successful Irish blues singer, that's Van Morrison. And the Maritime Hotel, 1964, kickstarts Morrison's career. The cover of Baby Please Don't Go, charting and all of that. There's a story before that.
Right.
So it's using a single city as a lens to go into the rock, pop and politics relationship in a decade that we all kind of think we know.
Right.
Because the 60s is such a big place in our present, doesn't it?
Of course, yeah.
So that's what that endeavours to do, and it's I hate to do the old book plug thing, but it's I think it's going to be available to buy on the 4th of September.
Right.
Through Amazon and all the usual sort of stockists. But I'm immensely proud of it, in part because I've got a genius of a co-author, and that helps an awful lot. My co-author Joanna Braniff is one of the brightest people in terms of making critical connections I've had the good fortune to work with.
Oh, wow. We'll put the link in the description as well where you can get the book.
You don't need to do that.
No, we'll flash the book up as well. So, no, thanks for coming down.
Thank you.
I'm shocked because we're talking about Irish music and we never mentioned Phil in it.
Phil, there he is. Bless him.
And he's one of my heroes.
And his magnificence.
But I think that says enough. Just him in the background just says enough. But Noel, thanks so much for coming down. It's run a bit over time, but I think we just got so much to talk about. But
so thank you very much. And I thought it was around about 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry I have to rush off but it's we're doing a kind of a wee so with a book retailer in the States.
Right.
And I think they're going to I'm going to have no voice left because I'm supposed to be recording a podcast.
Right. Oh, you're going to be all like podcasters out.
Yeah, but at least this with your good self, I wasn't just talking about the book. This is going to be talking about the recent book. So thank you for letting me roam free through my past, such as it is.
Oh, hi, it's been an absolute pleasure, Noel. But thanks for coming down.
Oh, thank you, Cliff, and thank you very, very much indeed. Take good care of yourself.
And you, man. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.